Hey there, fellow adventurers. Welcome to Tryst with a Werewolf. Are you ready to step into a world where the line between human and beast blurs? Here, we'll uncover the hidden tales of werewolves, their forbidden love, and their wild adventures. So, come along and let's embark on this thrilling tryst together. Chapter 13, Surviving the Open. 45 bullets when the sun rose to the morning. I jumped awake to the strong sound of a low rib biting. My now alert senses trying to look around the forest floor for a water pool with some large frog. But my search became frantic when no water feature, nor frog, showed itself. Then N, also awake and still holding me, tapped my shoulder and pointed up into the tree branches. I followed the gesture and noticed a fat black rough, skinned thing with long thin wings high up. Frog was already on my mind because of the sound, but I could see where this thing might resemble a frog. Maybe frog, that would be a good describer. What is it? I whispered. Kandizie. He answered so straightforward. I wondered if he really knew what I asked Ho. I knew the sign for frog. A flipping under your throat. I pointed and signed frog. Kandizie. He pointed and smiled. Kandizie. My smile followed. Kundizie. He nodded. No mouth. He whispered and then gently sat me on the grass away from him. I watched as he crept around behind the trunk of the tree, and then it was like I was completely alone. Any movement of his was silent. It made my nerves return slightly. My heart rate started picking up its tempo, but then a small change was above in the treetop. My glance landed on it, and it was half the N's face, kicking out from behind the trunk, on the same level as the... Shoot, what was it called? Kabakan, Tadizina, as the frog. When he noticed me, he smiled reassuringly with, "Oh my gosh," a very sexy wink, and then hid back in the branches. My face heated in response. I assumed him climbing the tree was to get the frog. I was not assuming that he'd leap from out of nowhere calling some wartime battle cry, catching the frog's wings with one hand, do some aerobatics around the wide branches and drop to the ground like some freaking samurai monkey. Ho, light out Rocky. Plus, that was kinda hot. Okay, super hot. But I tried to dust off the red patches to my skin and take in his frog. The frog thing was much bigger than I took it for, up that high in the branches. It was the size of a full-on basketball. And the thing was screeching now some high-pitched bat sound, not the calming frog croak wake-up call it gave a few minutes ago. Then N simply grabbed the head and twisted, ending its life quickly and humanely. He then handed the whole thing to me with a grin on his face. Arihanks. Mustering up my butchering courage, I stood and took the animal, then reached for the knife in my boot, ready to gut it, but stopped when the Nen jumped back into the tree. He just bounced and did a pull-up, like that branch was not 12 feet off the stinking ground. Maybe calling him there wasn't far off. He was freaking Superman. He took a minute on the branch where the frog was and then hopped back down, landing easily beside me. N then took the frog back and held a handful of small speckled eggs out to me eat. I stared at the eggs, exact in size and color to the eggs he gave us for breakfast day one, and then looked at him incredulous. That frog eggs, then N. Seriously, I ate that frog eggs. I thought you gave me unicorn chicken eggs. Then I started chuckling and took the eggs from his outstretched hands. Thank you, I guess. He grinned and then headed a ways off to get the animal. I turned and stared at my butane stove for a few minutes. Now that I knew these were not some normal chicken eggs, I was even more weirded out to just down them. But I already ate them raw once and I was down to my last can of butane, and there might be better times to use it. My over-easy eggs would have to wait. Making up my mind, I broke the top off and downed them like a Slurpee. Not yum. Then N appeared back at my side, moving silently with his frog now processed. He sat on a stump and proceeded to eat while I arranged the items in the wheelbarrow after my frantic midnight search. Hurt period. Yes, from behind me. Darn it then, Anne. Stop talking about my period. I cleared my throat. No. No period hurt. Walk today. I was too chicken to turn around to see his reaction, choosing to sign to the side and then keep organizing instead. He grabbed a water bottle for each of us and downed his, watching me expectantly. Okay. I'm drinking. When I finished, he took the empty bottle and replaced it back in his bin. Max Brady, my faded mate. White splashed around me and my wound spun with the beat of the heavy techno music the DJ was playing. I was excited he recited he was signs too, but really most of the signs I knew were words he already could say in English. So our communication issues were probably going to still be there, unless I could start making up a bunch of words. He lifted his bins and waited for me to be ready. I grabbed one wheelbarrow handle and with the other side to point forward. Go yes. Walk. Well, Kay. He nodded and started out. Day 2. Here I come. We walked for hours. I ended up having to rest a moment and tie rags around my Nintendos after all that pushing. They worked okay as makeshift gloves, but I was a dunce to not carry a good pair of quality leather gloves in my toolbox. Maybe I could get the nun to make me some. I checked out his pants. The leather slacks he wore were certainly homemade. He could figure gloves out. I then grinned at my view from slightly behind him, finding myself checking out more than just the stitch work. I ran over a rock and the wheelbarrow wobbled. Shoot. I scolded myself and then righted the load. Eyes? My glance popped back forward, and I giggled. I was watching where I was going. Another hour and we stopped for lunch under a pretty yellow apple tree. I pointed excitedly to the ripe fruit. Apple eat yes, no. Why any me yes? He reached high into the branches and picked a lovely one out for me and another for him. I was a little leery after the asparagus strawberries, but he bit into it and ate it down fine. So I tried a bite and it wasn't an apple again. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't something you should put in a pie. I guess I could liken it to the sweet onion flavor after you sawed onions long enough to bring out their caramel color. There was still some sweetness there, but just enough tangy onion flavor to not want to bite into one of them for dessert. Still, they weren't entirely bad, so we put a few in our packs where we could find some room. The more food, the better to keep on hand. A few hours later, I stopped my constant Potter story word chatter and smiled up to the Nen. We came upon another crystalline river. I set the wheelbarrow down and unwrapped the rags from my hands, ready to put my hands down in the flowing water, when the Nen's hands were stopping mine. No, his face was up in the air and he was taking long inhales. Now go. He pushed me to sitting away from the bank. Okay. I sat back on a rock and waited as he followed the flow upwards. He came back only a minute later, shaking his head. No water. UFA Iziat Hilo Asivu. Hivai. I stared up. Is it Hilo so kufa? He bent to one knee and pointed to my still bandaged arm with the ugly boils, then tenderly rubbed over it. Oh, deathberry water. I scowled at the pristine-looking water and gave it the finger. I then sat back on my arms and sighed up to the sky. Darn you deathberries. I was really looking forward to putting my feet in the cool water. Walk. Yes, no. He held his hand out to help me up, grabbing his hand and letting him pull me up. I moaned. Walk, yes. He then lifted me clear into his arms and my grip stretched around his neck. Max Spidey, my faded mate. White splashed around me and my wounds spun with the beat of the heavy techno music the DJ was playing. Then I laughed. I said I could walk. I can walk. He then started trotting us away and I looked back watching our packs. Our stuff. You can't forget my thii. I squealed as he took a leap clear across the river. He stepped a few more strides and then put me down. He laughed at my disheveled existence. No water. He hopped back over the water and grabbed my whole wheelbarrow up on one hip and jumped it back over to me. Yeah, off Rocky. Funny guy. I could have jumped that. I stared at the running water. Probably. Okay. Fine. I may have needed the help. I chuckled. Show off. Then N had his bins and started walking over while I red-eyed the rags to my wrists. We wandered a few more steps when he looked down and smiled. Hurrah, Whitehider. I giggled. Harry Potter. I signed a lightning bolt on my forehead. That had to be a good sign for him. Continuing on with the wizard-eyed story, we walked until dusk, stopping a few times to give me rest breaks so when I thought of a new sign I could teach him. He started getting really good about learning the signs for things that he began to ask for signs I didn't know. After rock, Mark Spidey, my faded mate. Lights flashed around me and my room spun with the beat of the heavy techno music the DJ was playing. Stick and Roach, I figured I needed to start writing down my own signs so I could remember them later. Fishing out my mini notebook, I tried to draw the signs and names of those few I made up. When the N was happy about a stopping spot, I dropped the wheelbarrow handles and gave a sigh of relief. I was pretty excited about how my wheelbarrow was keeping up, but I sure hoped that Molly would pop out from behind some tree soon. After quickly setting up the perimeter wire, I was already yawning as I laid my sleeping bag down and sat on it like a picnic blanket. Then N dug around in our food packs for potatoes and jerky for our dinner. Then he started around the woods for sticks and dry branches, making us a spot for a small fire. He sat back and caught my attention, holding his hand out with an upright rolled fist. Fire. Fire. I looked to his ring of wood. No fire. He rolled his eyes and started making the motions to do a lighter. Fire. El Fire. I grinned and stood to grab the lighter. You made up a sign. Good for you. Fire. I found my box of matches before the lighter, so I figured it was a good time to teach him to use them. These are matches. Matches, fire. I held a stick out and then struck it against the box. His face lit with enthusiasm at the new brightness. Fire. I put the match down in his pile and waited for the tinder to catch. While we waited, I helped the and try to start one. I put a stick in his fingers and guided his wrist over the rough texture. He put a match to the box and immediately poked a hole right through the side. Oh, careful. Soft. I helped him pick up another match and held over his wrist as he struck it around the new hole. He beamed at the fire coming from the small stick. Njia ya wathande amlingo wakayo. An fazi. He then watched the match burn down so far that I started to say something, but he yelled, "Ubuh long how," and dropped the spent stick. He put his fingers in his mouth and I giggled. Fire. He grinned and pointed to the box. Fire. Mark Spidey, my faded mate. Lights flashed around me and my wounds spun with the beat of the heavy techno music the DJ was playing. I tapped my fingertips together. Nor. He copied. He went through 5 more matches before I took the box away. Then N. Our fire is going fine and you're wasting my supplies. I laughed. Sure, there were supposed to be like 3 matches in there, but who knows how long this would have to last us. Nor. No more. He pouted. It was seriously pretty cute. The fire. I pointed to the happy fire going on right in front of us. Matches. No play. He grabbed another piece of jerky and tore into it. Almost like he was a defiant teenager. Angry with me. I laughed and handed him one more match. Okay, Sorpus is one. He beamed and placed his jerky slice between his teeth and watched the match from strike to burn out, again hurting his fingers. After flailing his fingers in the air for a moment, he reached over and pulled me into a hug. Chuckling, I patted his back a moment. You're welcome, big guy. He looked up to the rising moons. Night. Yeah, it's probably time to sleep. I'm cooped after all that walking. I stood and gathered the sleeping bag back into a cocoon and settled down in it beside the fire. my arm as a pillow. Night then N. Night hell. He didn't lay down, still staring into the flames. My eyes closed, and even though we were out in the open, with the fire and then N still awake, I was able to fall asleep without the anxiety I faced yesterday. The fire was burning red coals, and then N was sleeping on the ground around the pit, our heads close together. I smiled at his soft face in the glow from the embers. It caused a small burn inside my stomach to match the heat warming my face. He looked so peaceful when he slept, and a single lock of his hair was touching over his eyes. It made me want to push it away. My hand came out to do just that when I realized why I woke up. There was movement on my belly inside the bag. I screamed a sound so bright that Earth probably heard it. I ripped the zipper down and flipped the bag off me. In the same instant that Ben N jumped to his feet, fingers curled and ready to attack. Any other time I would have looked twice, because the tips of his nails seemed wrong. But instead I was staring at the hairy tarantula next to me with bright yellow points at each leg. Ben N must not have liked the idea of me next to a spider either, because suddenly I was picked off the ground like a house cat, leaving the spider scurrying around to find shelter that was not tucked into my shirt. Then N spun me around and put me on a large branch, as far as he could reach in the tree. His scan met the ground, and he found a large rock, picking it up with ease, then smashing it down on the tarantula when it rushed off my sleeping bag. When he was convinced it was just a pile of dead goo, he took a breath and then climbed up next to me. "Is his cuck ill?" I diddled. "Yep, then end hill." "Sorry, I usually don't mind spiders. Just anything crawling in my sleeping bag was bound to freak me out." Night. Tree. Grimacing, I looked down. I mean, we weren't that far. Maybe 10 feet. But still enough to make a dent in my skull if I fell. "No," I pleaded. "L, then N. Night." I turned to see his outstretched arms again. "Do we have to?" "Then N. L safe." But it was better than being afraid of hairy spiders climbing in my bag again, I supposed. Sure. I guess. Yeah. I turned him back delicately against his chest, his arms folding around my front. Already I was yawning, even up in a tree, so maybe I'd be able to sleep. I let myself relax against him, one hand resting against his arm, the other clutching a close branch like I'd hold myself up if I rolled over in my sleep. Yeah, right. His chin leaned against my head softly, and it pushed a small smile to my lips. I was already feeling his warmth sink into me like I was still by the fire. It felt amazing. The bad thing is I was starting to get used to it. And the worst thing, I was starting to like it. Chapter 14, Protector 45 Bullets. When I woke and realized we were still in the tree, my hand raced back to clutch the branch in fright. Then N's hand wrapped around mine and pulled it softly from the branch. "Safe," he whispered softly in my ear. It caused a delicious chill to speed up my neck. "Right. Thank you." I twisted just my head to look back at him. And we go notary now. Grass." He nodded and adjusted me so I was cradled up in his arms and then rocked from the tree. He pointed to the ground and set my feet upon it. "No go." He added a stern look. "Sit stay." Got it. I grinned and then laid back over my sleeping bag still across the ground. His eyes wide and slightly. Is his cut. And then in an instant I was back in his arms, hovering above the ground. I hadn't even seen the movement. "Wow, Spidey," my faded mate. White splashed around me and my wheels spun with the beat of the heavy techno music the DJ was playing. "Hi to you too." And then I laughed, clutching around his shoulders. He started kicking my bag around, but I guess his spider search was unsuccessful because he laid me back down on it. "No go. No go." I saluted. "Go find your bat frog eggs." He ruffled my hair playfully and then jogged into the wilderness. "Jerk," I protested, as I pulled my hair down from the bun and tried to finger comb all the loose bits back. Then I tied the bun back in tight and took some time with a human minute, changing my clothes and replacing the pink hematite back to its case. I flicked at the little bar in my arm. At least you're doing your job at shortening the tide. I finally found the headlamp and wrapped it around one of the wheelbarrow handles when an N came strolling back into camp. He was holding his arms behind his back and wearing a monster grin. I smiled back and sat down on the sleeping bag, pretending I'd been there the whole time. What? He sat down beside me and then held out a black and white fur. I took it and examined it. It was a pouch connected to a belt, just like the one he wore, but made with skunk fur. Beaming, I looked up to the N. Is this my skunk pelt? Did you cure it? Oh, I seek Wama. He patted his pouch. Then I seek Wama. Bounding at his neck, I wrapped him in a tight hug. Thank you. I love it. He stroked down my back and whispered huskily, Anita bother you kayuti hayuyai pande. I sat back and looked over the craftsmanship. It was superb. And when did Eden make it? We've walked all day. During his morning runaways. Maybe I shouldn't be so upset with being abandoned when he uses it to make me presents. Meeting his handsome eyes, I smiled bashfully. It's very nice. Thank you. His face was in a soft smile and he rubbed a thumb over my cheek tenderly. Okay, ozafeze no muhal. I thought about leaning forward, my eyes darting south to his lips, but chickened out. Instead, I stood and shimmied the belt around my jeans. Then I moved my hips back and forth to watch it. What do you think? He sat forward, arms wrapping his knees with a grin, gazing at me strutting around. He nodded appreciatively. Then N watched me for another minute and then stood and grabbed the food bin. He walked into the trees calling for me to follow. Yes, go. I stopped flaunting my new pouch and twisted back to the other bin, grabbing up the wheelbarrow. Max Spidey, my fated mate. Lights flashed around me and my wheels spun with the beat of the heavy techno music the DJ was playing. Don't we need the other bin? Bin N. That is all my. He stepped back and adjusted his bin with one hand and caught one of mine from the wheelbarrow. No go. Mark Spidey, my fated mate. Lights flashed around me and my wheels spun with the beat of the heavy techno music the DJ was playing. Oh, water. Starting to tug me, I smiled and let him lead me through the trees. We only went 100 yards or so when a small stream opened up into a wading pool. The water had a greenish hue with moss floating along the top, but then N started digging out our empty water bottles and filling them, so I assumed it was good enough to drink. Water drink, yes, no. I asked cautiously. Water drink, yes. He leaned in and cupped a mouthful. I thought about dashing back to my supplies for my water straw, but decided to just go with it. I pulled a drink to my mouth and the water was slightly warm, with a soft seaweed-type flavor, but I was happy with water to drink. He then pointed to a little way down the stream where there was an overhang and I saw a handful of small golden fish swimming in it. Can we catch them? I asked myself, imagining going through everything in my emergency kit, but I didn't have lures or string. I started trying to think about how to piece my extra wire into a trap or net, but then N just hopped over to the other bank and placed his hands in the water. My thoughts calmed and I watched him. He was entirely still for 30 seconds and then in a blink had both hands out, each with a small fish, barely the size of his palm. Cool, I exclaimed, watching the fish dash around the pool at my loudness. Oops, sorry. He seemed to know it was praise and looked proud. He then positioned both fish in one hand and brought the dagger from his side pouch and cut the heads off against a rock. Then made quick work gutting them. He handed them to me. Fire meat. Okay, thanks. I smiled and then started back to the camp holding a fish in each hand. They didn't look so tiny in my palms. The fire had pretty much died down, but I made quick work bringing another small fire to life and set the fish in my small pot. While it cooked, I quickly went through my things, figuring out which items I wanted to keep in my new pouch. Surely the extra bullets, mace, and a lighter. Out of habit, my cell phone, and a few other little emergency items went into. When the fish were just about done, the N came back with the top of the bin covered in side by side fish. He sat beside me and started eating one right off the bin. Noticing my attention, he held the half-eaten fish out with a smirk. Oh, dude, don't think you can tease me. I actually ate sushi every week on Earth. I grabbed the fish from him and took a bite, and then handed it back with my own wink. He stared at me wide-eyed, and when I went back to cooking the other fish with a smirk, he bellowed his laughter. H. Lansey, no fire. Well, hell, Earth fish no fire. I guess it would serve me right to get sick on fish of your planet. Like me trying to eat that chicken food. He held a fish out, genuinely interested in if I would take it or not. Nah, I better keep 2 lands by fire. I pulled a cooked one out and started eating it right from my hands. I looked to him and smiled, holding my note to him. He looked dubious. Oh, come on. L no firefish. Then N firefish. Are you chicken? He groaned and grabbed it from me, taking his own bite. He squished his face up as he ate a piece and then handed it back to me. Good. Good. That face suggested no good. I laughed. I took a bite and sealed wide and fake. Like. A pinch away from my heart. Then I grabbed a raw fish and pretended to take a bit and grimaced with a tongue out and everything. Don't like. The same pinch, but then flicked away at the end. He grinned, watching my overkill faces. Like. Don't like. I repeated. He nodded. Don't like. Looking at his row of fish, I asked. These. Fire yes. Fire no. He pushed two more over to me. Fire. Then started placing the others in the bin atop the green-tinted water bottles. No fire. Got it. As I was watching the cooking fish in the smaller pot, I handed that and the larger thermal cooker pot. Mark Spidey, my fated mate. White splashed around me and the wind spun with the beat of the heavy techno music the DJ was playing. Please. He nodded and started off for the stream. Getting out my baguette if I chopped carrots, apples, and potatoes, and the 2 fish he allowed for me. He smiled, handing the pot over. Mark Spidey, my fated mate. White splashed around me and the wind spun with the beat of the heavy techno music the DJ was playing. Thank you. I poured a little out of the top, much to his dissatisfaction, and then dumped the chopped foods in. Soup. I signed hot drink and then placed the whole covered pot on the fire, hoping it wouldn't topple my full meal over. It balanced well enough, and I turned to say something to the N and he was gone. Again Dothraki. Why do you just abandon me? I swear I'm abandoning you sometime and seeing how you like it. But he came back in just a few minutes, hands full of greenery. I lit up. Herbs. Please tell me those are herbs. He put one handful right into the pot. The other he started mashing with his mouth. Oh. I recognize those kind. I pointed to my arm. For the deathberry boils. He nodded, so I started unwrapping and wiping the old paste away. As he continued chewing, he scowled at the still present boils. Don't be too mad. No hurt. And look, I motioned the size difference. Last week here. This week here. Healing. He then spit the paste out and I diligently held my arm, waiting for the slimy substance. Massaging it in carefully, he examined the wound, still not very happy and growling in his language. Stop whining about it. Not all of us can be so freakishly good of healers. I looked over his completely healed torso. There wasn't even a scar. He got a new rag and bandaged my arm up. It was a later start to walking than we had before, but it was nice giving my feet a bit of a break. Break wouldn't last though, and off we went again. Harry Potter now riding over the castle on the back of a hippogriff. We only stopped for a few pit stops and a quick lunch that day. making up the time we rested in the morning. I was somewhere in the middle of a mere people scene, still talking up my book when all of a sudden I was 20 feet away from the wheelbarrow and then Anne had me pressed up against a tree, mouth covered with one large hand. What the heck doth Rocky? When my mind sped to catch up to where my body was, I looked at the Anne in horror. Excuse me. Came out more like MMsism hum. No mouth. He whispered down in my ear. And then I noticed how absolutely frantic his body language was. His muscles were stiff and strong, head sprinting about, ears perked. Werewolf. My eyes wide and in fear, and I nodded, acknowledging that no sound would come from my lips. He let my mouth go, but stayed pressed up against me for a few strenuous minutes. He then leaned back down to my ear. No go. Then he lifted me with one arm and climbed the rough tree trunk with the other. I was carried high up into the tree. I scrambled to hold on, balancing between the branches, but finally righted myself. He looked up to me, making grave eye contact. No go. No walk. No mouth. He pointed to his lips. I nodded, leaning back into the tree, knowing he was about to disappear. When he was sufficiently certain I was going to stay put, he dropped, then ran off like a bullet, image blurring with speed. In mere seconds, both bins and wheelbarrow were tucked at the bottom of the tree and covered with massive amounts of forest greenery. Then his blur was shooting off over the hill into a next valley. Holy Rambo. He was fast. I rubbed my eyes, trying to figure out if I saw what I saw. I stayed put a few quiet minutes. Maybe it was an hour, but I got antsy to know anything of what was going on. As quietly as I could, I started climbing the tree higher, trying to get any view into the valley. When I was as high as I dared, I situated myself and pulled the rifle from my back, twisting to look through the scope. Seeing clearer into the valley, I used the scope like binoculars. It seemed like any wooded valley on Earth, and nothing was out of the ordinary. Setting the scope all around, everything was clear, but eerily clear, silent. No animals showed their face, nor made a sound. Seemed like those saber-toothed tiger creatures were the apex predator. I sincerely hoped they couldn't climb trees. Replacing my gun to my shoulder, I laid back against the tree right there close to the top and just tried to give my feet a good relax after days of walking. I unwrapped my hands and let the sweater out. After an abhorrent amount of time and still no sign of the N, I wasn't sure how long I should wait for his no-go rule. At best, I was 10 more minutes in this tree before I desperately needed a human minute. I climbed down to the lowest branch, the one that N had lifted me to, and realized that was quite a jump down and there was no way I was getting my arms around the trunk to climb back up. I could only imagine how angry he'd be seeing me hanging out on the ground after he told me to stay put. But how long did I have to stay put? Until I died. Until I needed new undress. If an N's so scared of those saber-tooth us, there's a reason. Maybe he really could die. I mean, remember that well the first day I met him. That should have been fatal. Am I supposed to be in this tree when he's bleeding out? Nope. Okay. I think I'm done with those thoughts. But then nurse, my boy. I think I'm done with this tree too. Sorry about that. Taking a deep, calming breath, I let myself hug the trunk as best as I could. Then I pushed off and held on, trying to let myself shimmy down. My palms and arms were getting pretty scraped up, and I could tell my pants were rolling up over my ankles, as the skin there was starting to sting too, but I couldn't go back now. I made my choice. I just have to bite the bullet and keep going. Reaching about 8 feet off the ground, I called that good and let myself drop the rest. Luckily, I stayed less clean. I landed on target and knew I hadn't hurt anything. Well, I guess not specifically anything. I looked over my arms and noticed the bunches of tiny scratches across them. They should be fine. I'll just rinse them with some water and let them dry. If I even had any bandage left, there weren't any scratches deep enough to need them. I did need to readjust the deathberry bandaging from getting scooted around as I roughed it up against the bark, but I just squared my jaw and quickly read-eyed it. And then I ran for a bush. Completing my human minute, I dug into the greenery that covered my supplies and grabbed out my notebook and pen. I put it in a carrot. Marked Spidey, my fated mate. White splashed around me and my wounds spun with the beat of the heavy techno music the DJ was playing. And some jerky into my purse and then threw that over my other shoulder. Blowing out a large breath in question, I looked over my choices. They were all big, maybe cottonwood-looking behemoths that were going to give me some trouble climbing their trunks, but I could see a giant thinning spruce in the distance I could get a good climb on. It wasn't too far, and it wasn't out in the open, so maybe that would be a good compromise. I'd be back in a tree, but one I could actually climb. And then Ann could see me just fine from the tree he dumped me in, so he shouldn't be too mad I wandered off. I wasn't so sure that was true. Actually, I was almost certain that I was going to get my butt chewed when he got back, but I was almost tempted to play hide and seek, just to show him how it felt to turn around expecting someone there and they weren't. I wouldn't tempt fates that bad, yet but I was getting in the other tree. Just a minute or two later, I arrived at the tree and hefted myself up in as high as I could go. Again, at the top I eyed through my scope to check the surroundings, but nothing of interest caught my eye, so I relaxed to try for some sketching to wait out the time. When an ink towel in a tree had fully come to life on the page, I flipped back a few sheets and studied my new signs for what I had made up. I shouldn't expect an N to remember the signs if I couldn't. But with still no hint of the giant, I made up my mini-meal right there in the tree. Colors of sunset were flowering in the sky when the N popped back into existence. When I finally realized he was alive again, he was already coming my way, eyes on me. He was glaring and I giggled, waiting silly fingers. I couldn't tell for sure, but with how his neck moved I think he rolled his eyes at that. He climbed up the tree with ease and met across from me. Everything okay? Werewolves. I made up a sign with tapping fingers in front of my mouth like biting werewolf teeth. He eyed the new sign. Safe. Werewolf go. He pointed over the valley. A moment later his gaze came back to mine. A new smile emerging. Marked Spidey, my fated mate. White splashed around me and my wind spun with the beat of the heavy techno music the DJ was playing. I returned his smile. He held out his hand and in his palm were 3 rings. 2 gold, 1 tarnished silver. 1 gold just a band, the other studded with red stones like rubies. The silver with a setting of a sparkling diamond. They were all gorgeous. H law MBEYODWW yells ease and dene guys EOC benza. I eyed between him and the rings. They're very pretty. Are they for me? He grabbed my hand and slipped the silver over my finger. You yen IQ onda. I like it, I said. But maybe I wasn't pleased enough because Huffton pulled it off, then tried the gold with rubies. Could I want manage? It's nice too. Then N. Thank you. What are you wanting me to say? That I'll marry you. I gave a teasing smile. It still wasn't a reaction he was looking for, I suppose, because he tried the last. You yen IQ onda. I think this one is a man's band. You should have it instead. I took it off and replaced it in his hand. He nodded with a large sigh and put all the rings into his pouchette. Soup should be ready for us. A single nod and then he started down the tree, waiting for me to follow. It had been quite a while since we cooked the soup, but it was still nice and hot. Thanks, thermal cooker. I spooned myself out a small bowl seeing as I already had something to eat, and then just handed the whole pot over to Ben N. It was the first smile he broke since I rejected his ring. Maybe I should just take that ruby one. It wasn't totally an engagement ring, and heck, he wasn't even putting it on my ring finger anyway. Maybe it meant something different here. Probably not. We slurped our soup, and when I was finished, I flashed a smirk in N's way. Firefish. Soup. Like? No like. He took another deep mouthful from the side of the pot. Like? I'll like soup. Me too. Your herbs were nice. Looking to the sky, I asked. Fire tonight. Yes, no. He shook his head. No fire. Werewolf. You said werewolves go. I said confused. Werewolf eyes. Fire. They can see the fire. The smoke. I nodded. Makes sense. Then I wondered delicately. A cold night, smiling after another mouth of soup. Not Han. A small fluttering of butterflies stirred my stomach. Okay. He grinned and then drank the rest of the broth and picked out the leftover chopped veggies at the bottom in a handful to eat. Then he rubbed his hands over his pants like a napkin as he stood. He grabbed my sleeping bag from the pile and then held his hand out to me. Night. Tree. My eyes raked over the tall spruce unsurely, but I placed my hand to his. His grin lit and he helped me to my feet. I grabbed the headlamp from my wheelbarrow arm, then went back to the tree. He guided me, pressing me to climb first, so I started up on my way to where my lookout spot had been. But then N called to me only about halfway up, leaning against two wider branches that had grown together. Oh, that's a good place. I noticed it did seem like a much safer spot to be when sleeping and slid back down beside him. This time when he opened his arms, I didn't hesitate. I leaned back into him, almost needing his comfort after a scary day worried about Sabertooth eating me. He tossed the bag and zipped around us and tucked it around me, his arms then caging me to his warm chest. All I could do was sigh and nestle back against him. I was starting to feel more at ease around him, so hopefully if I did fall asleep as hard as I felt like I would, he'd catch me before I fell to my doom. I woke up several times throughout the night as either of us needed to just to be more comfortable, but there weren't any wolf howls or spider attacks, so the night went as well as could be sleeping in a tree. When the cool morning air started to really sting my nose, I twisted and buried my face up against the N's neck. He made some sort of laughing hum sound that rumbled his chest. It caused my lips to smile against him, mourning that N. L. He greeted and then adjusted his arms to hug around me better, with a small tilt of his cheek against my head. I'm sure he was just wanting to make sure I didn't fall. That's all it was. Right. My fluttering stomach butterflies cried no. My nose was sufficiently warmed within a minute or two, so I sat forward and stretched. He adjusted so his legs were off to one side and followed with his own stretch, arms up high and twisting his back and forth. Then N. You're back, I exclaimed, taking in the pressure points dug into him from the bark. Hurt? Yes, no. Curving his chin over his shoulder to follow my point. He shrugged. No hurt. At least I had been able to move around a bit. He was pressed into the rough bark all night. Yes, hurt, I complained. Here. I grabbed on his shoulders and turned him to face away from me. I knew with how strong he was only letting me turn him. Then I spent a minute trolling my hands over the indents and getting them to relax back into his skin. It felt a little awkward at first, but he had given me quite a nice massage when I needed it. I could return the favor. Only a minute later, his arms moved out to branches on either side of him and his head rolled forward with a pleased sigh. It brought a smile to my face and made me more interested in continuing. It didn't take too long for the bark marks to release, so I roamed over his shoulders and arms a minute more in my own exploration. The pressure of my hands eased as I traced the muscles and down his spine, each definition carving into my own belly with tightening bands. After a few more minutes and I could barely breathe, I patted his shoulder. Done. He stretched through his neck and turned back to me, a full grin over his face. His eyes sparkled over me. Like, I bit my lip and giggled. Mad Spidey, my fated mate. Lights splashed around me and my room spun with the beat of the heavy techno music the DJ was playing. Yes, like. I pointed down before he could beg for more. Should we get going? He'd walk. He nodded and started climbing down with me right after. Chapter 15, Yielder of Thunder 45 Bullets. We had the rest of the fish for breakfast and then he took his morning disappearance. While he was off doing whatever he did, I decided it was time for me to get him a present. He'd done so much for me that I wanted to repay him. I wandered around the forest until I came upon a big leaf. It was dinner plate sized, and a beautiful orangey red color, like a maple leaf. Hoping it wasn't poisonous, I pulled the leaf and found a vine that I chopped a few feet from. Back at camp, I kneeled at my emergency tote and dug around until I found the matches. Grabbing a good handful, I tied them together like a bouquet and placed them on top of the leaf. Then I cut away half of the box's striker and placed it beside. Grinning at the leaf, I covered it around the bundle like wrapping paper and used the rest of the vine to tie it. It looked like some small-sized newspaper bundle you'd see at a store and made me homesick again, but I was pleased at my work. Hopefully then Anne would like it. About 30 minutes later, he announced himself with his to-note exclamation and I leapt to my feet in a grin. He smiled at me and I held out the leaf bundle. Yinilo Khu. He took it and stared confused. I make you a bunda a bashaiwi. Say benzai omuhol. Then he went to hand the mask back. I pushed it back to his chest. No it ends. Present. He looked again and I untied the vine. It fell open to show the matches. For then N. I pointed to them and then to his chest. His face turned to a full sunny beam as he picked at the matches. Then in fire. I nodded and giggled. Then in fire. Happy birthday. Imangalisayo. He then lifted me into his arms and pressed me fully against his chest in a deep hug, one hand still holding his gift. I hugged him back, melting into his heartening warmth, and soon the hug went from a happy exclamation to a loving embrace. His free hand moved slow and gentle over my back, and he nuzzled down into my hair. My heart started beating strong, and lips parted in heavy inhalations. A heat fell over my body that had nothing to do with the blazing sun, and it caused me to step back washed in embarrassment. I patted over his arm platonic ally, my fingers shaky, and tried to breath. Just wanted to say thank you for all the help. Thank you. Fire. He sighed, eyes gazing strong. You're welcome, I said hushed and then turned back to my bins. No longer willing to see his watchful glance. Should we start walking then? Walk, he agreed, placing his new matches tucked safely in his pouch. When we were packed, he started leading us off a diagonal path to the way we had been going. I figured he was trying to lead us around the open valley. It meant more steep mountains, but he'd been good to help with the wheelbarrow when I needed it so far. I told the rest of the Triwizard book animatedly, and while we stopped for a lunch break, I taught him signing numbers 1 through 10. I used small green pebbles to show the numbers, as well as finger counting. I wasn't really sure how 1 through 10 would help us, and especially since I didn't know any other numbers, but maybe I could figure out how many days I'm supposed to be walking to Molly. I didn't try with the signing alphabet, but I did think Molly needed her own sign. Max buddy, my fated mate. Lights flashed around me and my wheels spun with the beat of the heavy techno music the DJ was playing. I spoke with my fingers in an M letter and signed like learning. Since she had taught the Nen some English words, Teacher Molly sounded right for an identifier. Max buddy, my fated mate. Lights flashed around me and my wheels spun with the beat of the heavy techno music the DJ was playing. He followed. Lisette. And Lisette could be for her dog. I guess. Lisette. An L with a tap to my thigh. Lisette. Max buddy, my fated mate. Lights flashed around me and my wings spun with the beat of the heavy techno music the DJ was playing. Molly Maid. No, I shook my head. We don't have to do last names. He looked contemplative, then hit a flat hand against his chest. Max by my fated mate. Lights flashed around me and my wounds spun with the beat of the heavy techno music the DJ was playing. Okay. Molly Maeve. His flat hand held over his ear. Teo. Then a flat hand pressing down at his chest. Kane. Kane. What's Kane? Lisette's dog. I thought he was Oscar. He turned to me and smiled. Kane. Kane. MFOETHU. IQ Embola's NPC. Kane. Max Spidey. My fated mate. Lights flashed around me and my wounds spun with the beat of the heavy techno music the DJ was playing. Teo, I don't understand. I was confused. He looked around without purpose, trying to figure himself out. When he thought of something, he tapped my new skunk pouch. Cell phone. Max Spidey. My fated mate. Lights flashed around me and my wounds spun with the beat of the heavy techno music the DJ was playing. Baby L. I still wasn't understanding what he wanted. I can't turn it on. The battery is dead. We haven't been charging it on our hikes. Finding my solar charger, I opened the panels to the sun and plugged the phone in. It'll take a few hours for us to movie. He made a displeased sound and then thought of something else, turning me to him and looking deep into my eyes imploringly. Kane. Max Spidey. My fated mate. Lights flashed around me and my wounds spun with the beat of the heavy techno music the DJ was playing. Teo. Benin. Indal male. El Mali. Lisette. Mata okay. Earth female. My breath came out in a rush. Oh wait. You mean Tane, Maeve, and Teo are other people. Other men. Of your planet. Oh wow. I mean, I guess I shouldn't have thought that you left Molly and Lisette on their own somewhere. That sounds pretty dumb now. I left. Maeve and Teo. Oops. I thought they were last names. I asked a question with my expression. Molly and Maeve together. I lined to fingers meeting together tall. He nodded excitedly that I finally caught on. Max Spidey. My fated mate. Lights flashed around me and my wounds spun with the beat of the heavy techno music the DJ was playing. Max Spidey. My fated mate. Lights flashed around me and my wounds spun with the beat of the heavy techno music the DJ was playing. Max Spidey. My fated mate. Lights flashed around me and my wounds spun with the beat of the heavy techno music the DJ was playing. I startled, eyes wide open at the discovery of the couple's bedtime activities. That's nice. Lisette. Teo. Max Spidey. My fated mate. Lights flashed around me and my wounds spun with the beat of the heavy techno music the DJ was playing. He said matter-of-factly. Okay, so you know the sexual habits of all your friends. I found it rather disturbing, until I really thought about it and laughed. Actually, I guess Earth males would talk it up too. His emotion changed then to one of sadness. Tane. Ma okay. Max Spidey. My fated mate. Lights flashed around me and my wounds spun with the beat of the heavy techno music the DJ was playing. Oh no. Was Mata okay Kane's girlfriend? That's so sad. I stepped forward and touched his arm. He looked at my hand and sighed. Kane, mate. Werewolf kill. Yeah. I remember you saying that's how she died. That's sad she meant something to Kane, though. I hugged into him, trying to ease his frown. His warm hand rolled over my back softly. After a loving minute, I patted him and then stepped back. He looked up with a small smile. Max Spidey. My fated mate. Lights flashed around me and my wounds spun with the beat of the heavy techno music the DJ was playing. Max Spidey. My fated mate. Lights flashed around me and my wounds spun with the beat of the heavy techno music the DJ was playing. Baby. He put a large hand over my stomach. My heart did a delightful little dance in my chest. A Molly is pregnant. They're going to have a baby. That's so sweet. I then realized that them bringing a baby into this beastly plant was kind of scary. Wow, Spidey. My fated mate. White splashed around me and my wheels spun with the beat of the heavy techno music the DJ was playing. Will Molly be okay? Do they have a house? Are they warm? Are they safe? Safe. Made Molly safe. Yes, that's so neat. Maybe we should walk now. Go to Molly made baby faster. He nodded and we were on our way. I was tiring of the wizard's story for the time being, so as we walked I began to sing our songs I could remember. It was everything from Disney princess to musicals to Christmas carols. Then N kept sending side glances with grins my way, so I kept singing when the terrain wasn't too strenuous. Later in the day, he even joined me in a striking rendition of head, shoulders, knees, and toes. We laughed for a moment and then he hushed me. Meat. No mouth. I nodded and put the wheelbarrow down, thankful to get the weight out of my hands. He placed his totes down and then started inching up the peak of the hill in front of us. I started following. He laid down on his belly at the top and looked over. I mimicked his angle and looked over the top. In the valley below there was a herd of weird-looking goats. They were long-haired with goat-like heads and horns, but very close to the ground with almost no legs. Were these things like what I thought was a pig when he ate it? I pointed at the goat's seat. He nodded and put his hand on his dagger, lifting himself up to dash over the hill. I grabbed his arm and he let me pull him back down. No, then N. I'll kill. He shook his head no. I'll hurt. Stay. Watch. I pointed back and forth to our eyes. Then I pulled the rifle from my back and aimed. Letting my breath out, the bullet went right into a larger goat's neck. 40 for bullets. UMS and Duam Koliu. Yukayu Duma. He shouted in surprise at the firing, eyes lifting to the sky. The entire herd scattered around the valley, running into the trees. The shot goat ran with its buddies for only a few seconds before it fell to the ground spent here. He asked about the sound, still surveying the cloudless sky. I pointed out to the dead goat and then the gun. He stared back and forth from the goat to the gun. Gun kill. Yes, no. Yep, L. Meat. He spoke to himself. Ake manga jaryu kayuti hayuie wathande lo shinai. Yubu lalai bane elide. I stood at the hilltop and pointed to his dagger. Go butcher it. He nodded, though still seeming a little dazed. Then he stood and darted forward to the goat, taking it into the tree line. I figured this was as good a place as any to set up camp, so I began laying the fence wire around and started us up a fire. Then N came back with the thing butchered and it did look a lot like the pig, but the legs seemed much smaller. I signed goat. Goat. B-U-Z-I. Hey, I can say that word. I laughed. B-U-Z-I. 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 He smirked, then cut a miniature leg off for me. B-U-Z-I eat. Thanks. I placed it in my pan over the fire. He sat down next to me comfortably and watched me fiddle with cooking. He then looked to me with a twinkle in his eye. Oh yeah. Barak Spidey. My fated mate. White splashed around me and my wings spun with the beat of the heavy techno music the DJ was playing. I asked at a scheming tone. I'll eat no fire meat. Then any fire meat. He slyly held a small piece of raw meat out. You want me to eat it raw, and you'll eat it cooked. I had the outstretched meat chunk. Is that a challenge, mister? Then N. He pressured. I'll eat. Then N eat. I chuckled. All right. I'll try it. But just because you've appealed to my wagering side. I then cut a hefty piece of the cooked leg and handed it to him, taking his raw portion. We both dug into our pieces, watching the other. His face scrunched into rubbery misery, but I realized what? This was actually really good. He was right. Not cooked was totally better. I mean, I always like steaks to the rarer side, but they were still always warm and the outside seared. This was red the whole way through, but so tender and juicy I couldn't believe it, man. I was stupid to tease then N about eating it raw this whole time. Like, I smiled. That is really good then N. No fire meat good. Like, nor. I nodded, and then smirked at him. Then N more. Fire. He made a face. Not on tea like. I laughed at him. He scowled playfully and then handed me a good cut of a raw piece. It was eaten down, the cooked leg long forgotten. It was the middle of the night when my stomach rolled so badly. It woke me up. My body was freezing even against the N and my hands were shaking in strong tremors. My stomach rolled again, and my mouth started filling with saliva. Shoot, I was going to be sick. I jumped off the N and ran to cower beside a bush, my insides spewing out hell. Then N woke, panicked, and ran to my side. Don't come near, I begged as another round hit me. It hurt. He hovered over me for a few minutes as the sickness continued. When I finally felt I wasn't going to lose my stomach for a moment, I brushed some soil over my mess and laid down in the grass holding my head. It hurt. Yes, no. Yes, I groaned. Sick. Baby. I looked over to him in anger, almost forgetting my stomach. Baby. Who you callin' a baby? I cannot help being sick, Dothraki. He sat next to me and patted my stomach. Molly be law. Molly baby. El be law, El baby. I sat up to my arms wildly. No, Dothraki. This is not morning sickness. No baby. No baby. He asked confused. Be law. I laid back down, the quick movement already making me feel sick again. No baby. I think it's food poisoning. Hurt. Sick meat no fire. Meat no fire be law. His eyes wide and furfulsy. I nodded and then twisted back to my bush to let another round of sickness free. He paced around me in terror. Hey Ibo. Inyama el as ibu liu kami. Stop your yelling. I pleaded between breaths and then rolled back to my back. He kneeled beside me and tenderly took my hand. That didn't help. Can I get some water? He nodded enthusiastically and ran for a bottle, holding it to me in no time. I sat up and took the bottle, rinsing my mouth out. I felt like my whole body was sunken in. El fire meat. He let out a long exhale. El fire meat. No hurt. Rubbing my hands over my face, I nodded. Hurt. Sick no fun. We sat in relative silence for another hour, the quiet only breaking for my occasional bout of continuing sickness. But then he sat up tall and head darted around. What is it? I asked miserably. Great. I'm puking my guts out and now is when a bear attacks. Come and get me. I'll ring the dinner bell. Cut me out of my misery, Mr. Panda. He shook his head and scooted next to me, pulling me in his lap. In a ear. You thought you heard something. Heard? I cuddled down into his chest, letting his heat warm me after the sickness freezing my body. His fingertips roamed my arm and it was so comforting. I finally felt myself starting to drift. I jumped off his lap 3 more times through the night, but everything was already gone from my belly, so it was just terrible noises to frighten and end with worse. I was certain even if I wanted to try raw meat again, he would never let me even look at it. That was, if I lived. When sunshine hit my eyes, I realized I did live. So I sat up and tried for small bites of the last rambutant and sips of water. Then N hovered over me at every movement. Then I tried to stand to go do my morning business. He was not pleased when I grouched at him to stay put. He watched me barf. He did not also need to watch me pee. I tried to start walking various times throughout the day. Each time I would be unceremoniously picked up and set back on the N's lap, him cradling me to his chest. By the afternoon, my stomach completely settled. It started to become a game. How far would the inn let me walk from camp? So when he told me to stay and started to jog into neighboring trees, I decided to play another round. He went south, and I went back the way we'd been walking for days. I had gotten nearly 15 minutes away when I heard him shuffling in behind me. I giggled and waited for him to swipe me into his arms, but a full minute later and no pickup had me turning. Then in, but the area was empty. I stopped and surveyed the surroundings. Just the same trees and vegetation as normal. Then in, I asked again. No reply, but I had that feeling where eyes were on you. I grabbed the rifle from my shoulder and pointed it around the trees, letting my senses take over. If one of those panda bears were going to jump out at me, I would be ready. When a tiny snap of a branch came from my left, my scope darted that way, but nothing was in my sight. I inched into the trees toward the sound, ready to blow the brains off of whatever animal was trying to scare me. A handful of steps later, I stopped cold as a snake had dropped in front of me. I went to pull the trigger, but my finger wouldn't move. And then as I stood there paralyzed, the snake had opened up into the most brilliant flower I'd ever seen. My rifle instantly dropped to the ground, and I inhaled the sweetest perfume. It was those chocolate cookies with marshmallow frosting that my grandmother used to make during Christmas. The fragrance was undeniably beautiful, and my vision started doubling, glistening into some other time, the dancing, glittering plant fading to black. I stepped forward into my grandmother's kitchen, eager to taste grandmother's delectable cookies. Her smiling face holding a plate out to 6-year-old me. I lifted to my toes to breathe in over the plate. But instead of being warmed by the fresh from the oven cookies, my cheeks were warmed with pain. The UK, another painful warming across the cheek. El Sikuma and Jengamanj, stinging across my other cheek. My grandmother's kitchen was fading and then N's face hovered over mine, ready to slap me again. I put up my hand to stop him. My voice was weak. Hey, don't. He yanked me into his chest and placed his head over mine, a deep breath of relief coming from him. He stroked over my head and back, whispering again and again, Uye fila, Uye fila, Uye fila. After a full 5 minutes of support, he let me away with an angered face. No, go. Stay. Kill. He pointed to the withered flower head that had been severed from its vine only feet away. Plant kill. I'll stay. I looked away ashamed. Sorry, I didn't mean to go off the path. I just thought I heard something and wanted to defend myself. How was I supposed to know a snake flower was out here? I'll no go. I'll stay. I'll no play. He nodded and pulled me back to his chest and then carried me back to the campsite. I stayed sitting by him for the next hour, not saying anything. I felt horrible that my silly game almost ended in my death. It's one thing to be eaten by a bear, but I should not make mistakes and get poisoned by a flower just because I was flirting. He handed me bits of jerky and water throughout the time, and then he wandered around the campsite and picked up handfuls of tiny stones, dropping them next to me. Play. I finally almost smiled. Mancala play. He nodded, though wasn't as appreciative of the game as he had been last time I showed him how to play. He must think I need to play a game to stick around now. I pushed holes into the dirt beside us and put the pebbles set for a new game. I needed to figure out some other games we could play, but Mancala was a good one that didn't require language. A few rounds down, I pointed to the way we'd been heading for days. Go Molly. Sleep. I'll hurt. I'm not hurt anymore. Stomach safe. Walk safe. He shook his head. No stay. I sighed and nodded. Okay, but we're wasting a walking day. Lesi sits heosazama yuka yubi yulala. Sene formula angelania imanda. He purred, petting down my head. I nodded, and when he was certain I was all right, he started a fire and made a soup from the jerky and a few vegetables. I had to smile. You cook now. He poured some soup into the smaller pot and handed it to me. Soup. Eat thanks, big guy. As we finished our soup, the sun set and darkness fell around us. We sat in silence watching the small fire. Then scooted close to me and held his arm around my back, leaning to me. I wasn't sure how to feel about it. It was causing deep shocks of electric heat inside me. The feel was romantic to me, and I couldn't help wondering if I lifted my head to him. Would he kiss me? There had been plenty of flirting between us, but it never felt like such a coupling as right now. Sure, I'd slept in his lap plenty of times, but it usually felt more platonic. His arm around me, as it was now, felt so much more intimate than that. But how would I even know the romantic gestures on his world? What if I tipped my head? Should I try to kiss him instead? I didn't have to worry about it much longer. He released me, going cold, and pointed his sharp eyes at me. Stay. I nodded and looked towards the fire, my heart pounding hard at my stupid thoughts that maybe there could be something romantic about us. He set off and disappeared. It hadn't been 10 minutes when he came back staring me down. Night. Okay, I spoke, getting up and getting ready for bed. He kicked out the fire, then sat back against a fallen log. I walked up to him and hesitated. Was I supposed to sit on him now? Or had something happened at the snake flower that he was still angry with me at? He spoke in an annoyed tone and held his arms out. A relieved sigh broke through me. I thought maybe you were done with that. I sat down across him and he pulled me tight, wrapping warm arms around me. As I nestled down into him, a slight smile lifted my lips. I was wrong. It did not feel platonic. Chapter 16, The Pack 40 for Bullets. The next morning, I woke when N moved me to lie against the fallen log instead. When he noticed my awakening eyes, he whispered, "Stay night, then endo." Then his warm hand caressed down my cheek. Okay, I murmured and then folded myself against the tree and closed my eyes again. When the sun was higher in the morning sky, I woke again. The sleeping bag was over me, and then N was whittling a branch to a sharp point, scanning the tree line. Max Brady, my faded night. Lights flashed around me and my wind spun with the beat of the heavy techno music the DJ was playing. I yawned and sat up. He looked over and smiled, putting his tools down. Night good. Sleep then, N? Yes, I slept good. He dug through the packs and brought out a carrot and water eat. Thanks. As I munched my breakfast, I looked over as then N resumed his carving. Molly walk today. He surveyed the area rather obstinately and then nodded. Max Bitey, my fated mate. Lights flashed around me and my wind spun with the beat of the heavy techno music the DJ was playing. Walk. Smiling, I stretched, trying to wake up ready to go. I wasn't a coffee drinker, but man, I felt like a cup to push me going now. Even after the whole day of rest, I still felt like I could sleep another 8 hours. I stood and started gathering supplies and Tetrising them back into the wheelbarrow so we could walk more. Then N had seemed a little preoccupied the morning, so when he told me to stay and darted off into the woods, I thought nothing of it. But when it turned into 2 hours, I started to get worried. Okay, and I was getting annoyed. Why did he have to keep leaving me? I got my phone and solar charger back out and started to look through my old pictures again, smiling at the memories. I was stuck on a picture of my family, my heart filling with love and longing for them, when I heard the instant exclamation from the trees. I looked up, about to go off on the N for leaving me so long, but it was not him walking through to the camp. I jolted in surprise. 3 men, all breathtakingly handsome, similar to the N's height and build, strode together confidently. Practically naked, barely Tarzan scraps at their manhood. Even the several open wounds each had couldn't mar their beauty. Smiles each as attractive as the sun. All dark hair and strong jaws. And as I had been looking through pictures of my family, the word family was already on my tongue. Oh my word, these were the N's brothers. Hi, I stood excited. a large smile building. I can't believe we made it finally. Is Molly with you? Where's the N? Did he find you? Their smiles mimicked mine, and the center tallest man with the finest dimples I ever seen spoke with warm, rich tones. It was most definitely a sexy purr. The hikari ho. Bafona. Simdo lailam kami. The two that flanked him gave 30 laughs. All at once they froze mid-step and the man to the left spoke pointing at my hip. Sukume H. All gave wide spooked eyes. Center stared for a moment and then lightened. He shook his head with a chuckle, and then restarted his striding. Ansabi. Ake USA Filai. You seek Wama NJ. I looked out and saw nothing. Sukuma H. Mautspidey. My faded mate. Lights flashed around me and my wounds spun with the beat of Bahari techno music the DJ was playing. I quickly placed my cell in and smiled back to them. The other two flanked his steps. So, which is made? And Tame? And ERM? KO? I think. Was that Lisette's boyfriend's name? Is that right? The center man came right up to me and looked down with his gorgeous piercing eyes and white toothy grin. Sawabano Muhal. I didn't know what he said, but the way he looked at me made me blush. It was like how you feel when some hot guy starts speaking in Italian or French to you. It almost brought me to my knees. I said bashfully, and then he was kissing me. Strong and deep. And holy cow. I mean, I've had my fair share of kisses in my lifetime. But whoa. This was freaking hot. He wrapped his arms around my back, lifting me to my toes, and pressed tight against his muscled chest. My arms were rigid out to my side, fingers splayed in surprise and excitement. And, heck yeah. I was kissing him back. He was some super sorcerer with mouth work. He was working the tongue dance with a passion some Earthman could only dream of. He knew what he wanted, and he was leaving me aching to get it. I may have even moaned into his mouth, my hands now wrapping his mess of arms. It set his hands to fire, caressing over my body, rounding my bottom, and my leg lifted immediately to his thigh. He made some guttural passionate noise and hands slid around to my front, cupping my chest. It finally brought my head back to me and I stepped out of his reach. Breathing heavy and giggling, I could barely speak to the smiling idol. Well there now, babe. That was totally sexy, but just FYI, most Earth girls required dinner before second base. At least I usually did. His handsome eyes turned to his right and he gave a single nod to the flanking brother with an open cut at his chin. Cut chin guy dug in a hip pouch like thin ends and brought out a single stiff leaf. It was a bright yellow and shaped like a bay leaf. He held it up with some devilish smirk on his face. I turned back to my sexy new kissing friend and asked, "What's with the leaf fuck?" Sexy new kissing man leaned forward and in half a second sprouted hair from his whole body and cracked bones out into a massive wolf. A wolf as tall as a horse and weighty as a truck stood glaring down at me, teeth clicking. Werewolf. Frickin' wolf. My mind tried to rap about this freak just changing into some absolute monster right before my eyes. I opened my mouth to scream, but Kachin guy was instantly holding me close and sticking the leaf in my mouth. When he slammed my jaw shut, the leaf now on my tongue, it was like my lips were glued. A tingling sensation liquefied onto my tongue like the feel of eating a mouthful of whole clove seeds. The drug then slid down my throat, cutting off any way of speech. The third man with the longest hair and wide parallel scratches over his chest looked at the wolf and gave grave-sounding words. Engoku kapi lila. Kumbulaya kayu tishishayu kayula meko kujisian e kubulelos of his aimwaka yujo. The wolf nodded and scratched man stepped away. Before I could even think about running, Wolf twisted his head, opened his jaws, and bit around my center. Razor teeth sunk in a crescent pattern around my upper chest and stomach. Tears of pain immediately flooded my eyes, but my vocal cords held in the agonizing scream I was beginning to make. Even through my blurry vision, I saw the other two men bend forward into equally horrifying wolves beside me. They held their delight, and suddenly we were off. They moved like lightning, speeds like a roller coaster, taking jumps and darts around obstacles, me still stuck in the animal's mouth. He wasn't clamping down hard enough to seriously injure me, but I could feel the harsh teeth stabbing into me and gathering wet warmth into my clothing. The animal's tongue licked against my wounds, an outlandishly disgusting move against my belly. As the wolf thrashed around in its run, my neck whipped from side to side, sending my eyes blurring and my head spinning. Its tongue movement pushed the rifle into my hand, but I was pressed so hard that no movement would allow me to use it. The beast hadn't killed me yet, but I would kill it. Oh yes. The moment it put me down, it would be the worst kind of roadkill. I started yelling so many profanities through my broken vocal cords. Molly would be proud. That was until my head could just no longer keep up with the jolting, and I just had to hold rigid to not hurt myself worse. A few times during the beast's race I went in and out of consciousness, so I wasn't sure the length of time we ran when we finally came upon his stop. He unceremoniously let me slide off his teeth into sandy ground. I wanted to reach for my gun and blast its brains out, but I just couldn't. I immediately turned to all fours and vomited, my head dizzy and teeth cuts in fiery pain. Then I fell beside my mess when shaking arms gave out. A man's arms then lifted me to a chest. It was such a tender movement that my brain couldn't understand and thought my gentle father was carrying child me to bed. I collapsed into his embrace. He lovingly let me down to my soft bed that smoothed out under me. I realized it was not my father when lips were on mine. I tried to shake the lightheadedness away and lean left, pushing on the face. "Cha, Andowami," he spoke huskily to my ear, hand rubbing a caress down my side. "Stop," I tried to say, but the leaf sprinkling still dug into me. I felt the rifle's cold bite against my back and tugged on the barrel, but it was still stuck under me with his hefty weight pressing us into the blankets below. I kicked my feet out, but a simple movement of his legs stopped my thrashing. I was only marginally worried. I knew I would get out of this. As my thoughts started to clear with a new surge of adrenaline, the women's defense class I'd taken last year started bubbling in. I had to get to my rifle, and that meant this rhino needed to get off me. With all the power I could build in the close proximity, I shot my hands to his face and punched my thumbs into his eyes. But my double vision doomed me, and I only caught the side of his face. He wasn't even disturbed by the movement and grabbed my hands in one of his and held them over my head. He then leaned down to kiss against my neck, a hand trying to figure out my tight belt. I thought it would give me more time as he fumbled, but instead something sharp cut down into my hip, pants ripping open over the pocket. "F you," I screamed in my head and desperately tried to kick out of his hold. I got one hand free and thrust it down to get his other hand off my bare hip, when my wrist hit over a rolled tube. "Max, Spidey," my sated mate. White splashed around me and my wounds spun with the beat of the heavy techno music the DJ was playing. It was free from my pouch. My mind purred in pleasure. "You're done now, freak." I grabbed that cylinder, flipped the top, shut my eyes tight, and twisted away, spraying that EFFer right in the face. A holler sounded above me, and he lifted off. I stood and ran. The wolf man left crying in agony, holding his face. I was far back in some cave and ran the steps to the lit opening when the two other humanish monsters were instantly guarding the way. I let them say hello to some pepper spray as well, and they went down before either could lay their own hand on me. Running through their campsite was difficult as it was almost all sand. I was still woozy from some kind of whiplash effect, but tall trees were just 100 yards away. If these wolves were anything like the grablers I saw at the lake, I would never be able to outrun them. I just needed a vantage point. The hollers of the men were getting less and less as I scaled the tree and set my rifle to the cave opening. My heavy breaths would be a problem for aiming, but those suckers would die no matter how many bullets I had to put in them. I got my chance. a wolf emerged from the cave growling and teeth bared. Its nose went to the ground like a dog on the scent, but before he could get too far I held my breath, aimed, and a bullet went right between his eyes. The wolf dropped. 43 bullets. I waited for the beast to get up to put another bullet into his brain, silver or not, but the other two brothers then came running out of the cave. Both their human-like asses got bullets between the eyes too. Both down. 41 bullets. My scope was set on them, waiting for that wolf or those two fake wolves to get up for the next 30 minutes. I didn't know how long it would take for the werewolf body to reject an silver bullet. My eyes set on them, but every few minutes I tried to spit out the leaf or rip it from my mouth. It was clamped on with some plant-wise super glue, but I could open my mouth now so the effects weren't permanent. Then I almost gasped when another werewolf showed up in a blur to their camp. Maybe it was lucky those wolves stuck that leaf in my mouth. My sight was trained on him, quiet and ready, trigger finger craving the next kill. The new wolf just needed to turn ever so slightly to the right, and it would be dead too. With how hard it was to take the dragon down, I wasn't wasting bullets on a neck kill while I still had the element of surprise. Its snout was down at the ground and checking out its dead buddies. Good. No, it's coming a hole. Come on. Turn, non-earn. Turn, turn. Then I was in for a different shock. The gray beast transformed into the N and he took off running into the cave. The N. Why the N? I was speechless and it wasn't even the paralysis Leaf's doing. The N. He couldn't be a werewolf too. He was one of those monsters all along. No, I couldn't believe it. I wouldn't believe it. Those were monsters. He was so kind and sweet. But what did I know about him? He'd only been on my tail for a week now. He was one of them. He was afraid of werewolves, but he was one. All this time, my eyes started tearing up. That's Spidey, my fated mate. Lights flashed around me and my wounds spun with the beat of the heavy techno music the DJ was playing. Ben and then ran out of the cave, eyes darting around the surrounding area, nose lifted. My breathing came out in painful, angered huffs. I pulled the trigger. 40 bullets. Thanks a bunch for joining me on this tryst with a werewolf. I hope you had an amazing time exploring this mysterious world with me. Make sure to subscribe, leave your comments and likes, and I'll see you in the next tryst. Bye for now.